Yes. Mr. Blair and family leaving the church in Sedgefield. Well, we were talking just there with the Emanuels, who, of course, designed Princess Diana's dress in 1981. You talk about a very natural, a very intelligent, a very funny woman. It has been said that she was unprepared in a way for everything that being a member of the royal family meant. Did you get that impression?
I think it was just because she was so natural. I think nobody could have been really prepared for all the attention she was going to get. And I think that, you know, like I said, she had never had that before, and then suddenly she was barraged with it. And but then, you know, the relationship with the press grew, and when she needed the press there for her charities and things, they were there. And I think the work that she did on her humanitarian things was fantastic, and she should always be remembered for that, because she highlighted all these causes, and she uses all the press attention to highlight those causes for good. And I think just, you know, the last few years she's really was working terribly hard for those causes.
And not just seen it as a glamorous clothes horse, which she was criticised for heavily. I mean, having been made, the press made her the cover girl of the 80s and the 90s. She will now be remembered, thankfully, for doing all the wonderful charity work that she did.
Did you stay in touch with her? Was your contact go beyond
I saw her
just
very
the
recently. I mean, I saw her at a charity reception quite recently, and she was so full of life.
And is it possible to compare the two, the Diana of 1981, the shy 19-year-old, and the confident, outgoing,
she was
campaigning 36-year-old?
She was a lot more confident, obviously, and
but basically the same. I mean, often people would say to me, "What is she like?" And I say, "She's exactly as you see her. You know, full of smiles." Couldn't be nicer. And I remember at this particular reception apologising for keeping people waiting, and apologising that there was so much press there, and was it aggravating? And I said, not at all, you expected it. You know, everywhere she went, there would always be the press surrounding her. I mean, that was part of her job, part of her life.
Well, David Emanuel, Elizabeth Emanuel, thank you both very much indeed for that. Thank you. Well, the shock of Princess Diana's death has sparked an outpouring of grief amongst ordinary people across the nation. Flags are flying at half-mast, and hundreds of bouquets have been brought in remembrance for the princess, who for many people was the Queen of Hearts she aspired to be. Andrew Simmons reports.
Flags at half-mast across a nation numbed by shock with an immense sense of loss. Well before most of Britain had woken up, there were sombre gatherings at Buckingham Palace. At first, few could find words to express themselves. There were spontaneous acts of sorrow, and some were overcome with sadness. There was a sombre stream of people at Kensington Palace, the London home of the princess.
Just devastated. I mean, we're the general public. I'm just, you know, it's just heartbreaking how her kids must be feeling right now.
She was a great lady. The world will never be the same without her again.
The headlines on early morning newsstands were read with disbelief.
Just shock, really, yeah. I mean, I don't really know what else to say. It's just pure shock, I think.
She was such a wonderful, warm person, and I think she stood head and shoulders above the rest of the royal family, because in the way that she was a real human being, she cared about all the people, and that is why I'm so upset about it.
And the guy that was going to Liverpool Street, he just stopped over there and he just stood and cried. And at first I didn't realise what he was crying about. And then when he told me, I just stood here. I couldn't believe it.
I feel terrible, you know, really. I don't really feel like working, you know. It was such a shock.
She was good, she was lovely, and I just feel very shocked. I feel a lot of people would be the same today.
Very, very upset. Very upset. I think we all do.
Princess Diana's former press secretary, Jane Atkinson, was in deep shock this morning.
I think it's tragic and sudden and unbelievable.
Can I ask how you heard the news?
I was rung by a member of the media at about just after it had been announced, I think. Very early this morning.
And can I ask what went through your mind when you heard?
I didn't think I could believe it. When I went to bed, I knew there'd been an accident and that she was ill. And I think it's unbelievable. and I feel very sad for her family.
Midway through this most solemn of mornings, the people of Britain, no matter what their age, are trying to express themselves, sometimes with the simplest of messages. Andrew Simmons, ITN.
Let's just look a little more closely at this question of press intrusion into the princess's life. Princess Diana's brother, Viscount Althorp, gave a very angry response to his sister's death. He said he knew the press would kill her in the end. Well, I'm joined again by Mike Lloyd, a freelance television cameraman who's specialised in covering the royal family. Do you recognise yourself in any of Viscount Althorp's comments?
I'm inclined to agree with him. This was total stupidity of photographers following the princess at such high speeds. I think they were terribly wrong in doing what they were doing. It's one of the reasons that I gave up photography 6 months ago, because the pressure from editors was getting so strong. I wasn't prepared to do this.
Well, Viscount Althorp went even further, and you mentioned editors there. He said any newspaper editor who paid for pictures obtained in such a way had blood on their hands. Presumably you endorse that as well?
I do, certainly. There was forever increasing pressure on photographers to get better pictures. And of course photographers, if they're asked to do this work, of course they're going to get paid for it, and of course they're going to do the pictures. But the pressure was ultimately from the editors, yes.
You're effectively saying at some point, what, about 6 months ago, you thought things were going too far, you couldn't take it anymore?
That's correct, yes. I didn't want to do the paparazzi work. I never have. But the pressure of the editors to try and get increasing more pictures was such that I just didn't want to carry on with that type of game.
But as we know, editors always say, well, you don't have to buy newspapers, you don't have to turn on televisions. It was the viewers and readers who were the real pressure on them to get those pictures.
Yes, the readers always wanted extra pictures. They always wanted to see more pictures of Diana, especially with her new romance going on. And that brought even more pressure on photographers to get pictures. But going to those lengths is totally wrong.
Watching from the sidelines, as you were over the summer, did you see the feeding frenzy getting even more frantic around Diana as she developed this relationship with Dodi Fayed?
Yes, certainly. Everyone wanted a picture of Dodi and her together. And there was so much pressure on the photographers to get these pictures because of the editors. The editors wanted the exclusive picture of the two of them together. And as I say, the photographers are doing their job. I don't say that they would, to this length, they were very, very wrong in what they were doing following on motorbikes like that. But the pressure was on them from the editors.
Did you mix with any of the foreign paparazzi in your travels? What were they like?
I have seen them at work, yes, and they are pretty ruthless against the English photographers. If the English photographer was doing a similar sort of job and Diana said, please leave me alone, they would leave her alone. But the foreign paparazzi are just ruthless at this game.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike Lloyd. Well, Mark Webster is in the ITN newsroom where he's been monitoring the latest developments. Mark, what have you got?
Well, I have the very latest. You know, the royal family went to the church near Balmoral, a church service which was attended by the two boys, William and Harry. Apparently they walked in looking very pale, very sombre, very quiet. Obviously their first thoughts are to pray for the late princess. I can also say that details are now emerging of exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, the Prince of Wales is going to go to Paris as soon as possible. Arrangements are underway so he can fly to Paris as soon as possible. He'll be accompanied there by the princess's two sisters who'll be going with him, and he's expected to fly back with the body of the princess into the UK this afternoon, or this evening, I should say, about 7 p.m. Now, as has been happening throughout the day since we got this news, there have been more and more tributes pouring in. We've got now from South Africa's President Nelson Mandela, who said in a message to the Queen that he vividly recalled, he said, our meeting, that is when he met Diana, Princess of Wales, when she visited South Africa last year, and her burning desire to assist HIV-positive children in Africa. He went on that Princess Diana had indeed become an ambassador for victims of landmines, war orphans, the sick, and the needy throughout the world. And on that issue, George Fawkes, the minister who's actually going out to Montserrat to see the damage there, he said it would be a fitting tribute, obviously, that all the work that Diana, Princess of Wales, had been doing on behalf of landmines, the landmine charity, he said it'd be a fitting tribute for her if there were a worldwide ban on landmines.
Very much indeed, Mark. Well, the royal family, of course, not in residence at Buckingham Palace at the moment, but large crowds nevertheless have been gathering there. Let's take a look at the scene there now. Well, our correspondent Tim Hewitt joins us now live from Buckingham Palace. Tim, we've just seen the military band playing some music as people lay flowers outside Buckingham Palace. How would you describe the feeling there?
Well, it was a very, very moving moment, Dermot, and as you can hear, but you may not be able to see, the band are now marching away behind us. The guard has changed here at Buckingham Palace, as it normally does at 11:30 in the morning. And the guardsmen are now walking away. Before they left the grounds of Buckingham Palace, as you heard, they played a lament there. It was a very moving moment. People have been laying flowers in very large numbers all morning. There are hundreds of bouquets of flowers now at the main gate of Buckingham Palace. The crowd has been swelling here since first light, really. When we first arrived, it was dark. There were perhaps 3 or 4 people sitting alone on the steps of the pavement around Buckingham Palace, trying to reflect on what had happened. And as the morning has gone on, that crowd has swelled now to a crowd, well, you can probably see at least part of it, a crowd of several thousand. And I'm quite sure that as the day goes on, as the news spreads and more people hear about what's happened, it's going to get bigger. It's been a very, very moving day indeed here.
Tim, have you been talking to any members of the crowd? What have they been saying?
Well, they all share a great sadness. There's been a tremendous sense of loss here, particularly amongst those younger members of the crowd who I think particularly associated with the Princess of Wales very strongly. They felt that she was one of them. She felt as they did. She championed causes that they supported. A lot of people have been talking here this morning about landmines. There's been, I think it's fair to say, some anger directed towards the media. There are those people here who feel that in some way media intrusion may have been in part at least responsible for her death. So it's been a difficult morning at times in that respect. But overall, people are just, I suppose, shattered. Just can't believe it, as none of us could when we heard the news first thing this morning. They just simply couldn't believe it. And those who have come here just wanted to say that, a great sense of loss. And a lot of them are saying they can't really see where the monarchy, where the royal family are going to go now, because this is such a big shock that they can't see really how things are going to move beyond it.
Tim, thanks very much indeed. Well, Princess Diana will be especially mourned by the charities which she did so much to help. They've been leading the tributes this morning, saying her compassion and courage will be impossible to replace. Here's Ben McCarthy.
Those who dealt closely with Diana on the issues that she felt most passionately about, such as the campaign against landmines, say she was devoted to the cause she worked for. As part of her mission with the Red Cross, she travelled to Angola and Bosnia, visiting the victims of mines, spending time with children whose lives had been torn apart. Charity workers say her special quality was that she would tackle the problems that others were too scared to touch.
I will remember her as a very brave, very caring woman who went that step further, did something more that a lot of other people just wouldn't do. And I really think her children should be very, very proud of the work she did on this issue.
And the Princess was just as concerned about problems on her own doorstep. She devoted many hours helping the homeless here at the Centrepoint shelter in London. Following her divorce, Diana announced that she would be reducing her workload, but the AIDS charity, the London Lighthouse, remained a priority. And there was work with numerous hospitals. Recently, she was at the Royal Brompton publicising cystic fibrosis. She also spent time, both publicly and privately, with sick children at Great Ormond Street.
She had such an extraordinary quality of warmth, and there was She didn't hold back at all. If there was someone who was particularly sick who was keeping in the background, she would know that she would somehow sense that they were there, and she would make her way to them and she would talk to them and to their parents. And she gave enormous warmth, and she gave these people something that would stay with them all their lives.
At a glamorous gala evening in New York 2 years ago, she was presented with the Humanitarian of the Year award for her charity work. But it was with the people for whom the princess cared so much that she seemed most fulfilled. And now the thousands of victims around the world that she was trying to help will feel that they have lost their voice. Ben McCarthy, ITN.
Well, Mike Whitlam, the Director General of the British Red Cross, one of the Princess's favourite charities, is here with me now. Mr Whitlam, you organised and accompanied the Princess on that trip to Angola when she visited victims of landmines there. How did you get the Princess involved in that campaign?
Well, that particular campaign was at her instigation. She'd resigned from a number of charities, including the Red Cross, where she'd been a vice president. And she just telephoned one day before Christmas and said that she was interested in the issue of landmines and could we talk about it and actually get involved in the campaign in some way. It was linked to a premiere that we were also running at the time. And so we discussed it at some length, and at that point then she decided to get involved, and the campaign to try and get an abolition of anti-personnel landmines took off enormously. So the Angola trip was a real boost to the campaign.
Well, obviously you knew she was a major attraction, but were you prepared for the scale of interest that she generated?
Well, I think she'd been involved with the Red Cross for nearly 15 years, and both in this country and overseas, on other trips and to visits to our work here in the UK. There was always enormous interest. She attracted the attention of the press, of the local authorities, of the international politicians and so on. She could handle anybody, she could deal with anybody, whether it was a victim of a landmine or somebody who was starving, through to the Prime Minister and President of the country. So we knew the value of her involvement in this campaign, and the fact that she was so committed made it even better.
Some politicians at the time were a little bit rude about her involvement in the campaign.
Yes,
Would you
they were.
say she understood the issues fully?
She was well briefed before she went to Angola and fully understood the issues, and certainly since coming back from Angola has had many, many more briefings, was as knowledgeable about the subject on anti-personnel landmines as anybody in the country, I suspect. She'd given a number of speeches about the subject. She could have a discussion and conversation with anybody from the government or wherever. So yes, it was a campaign that she was so committed to, and it made a big difference to have her involved.
It would be true to say, wouldn't it, that only Diana could have generated that enormous amount of publicity?
Well, I think one of the things about the Princess of Wales was that she was a global figure, not just a UK princess. And we've been inundated with phone calls at the Red Cross this morning from other Red Cross societies around the world, African Red Cross societies, other Red Cross societies in the States, people who knew her and knew how committed she was to the many causes that they were involved with. So her uniqueness was both her charisma and her ability to attract the press, but she affected everybody's lives, hundreds of millions of people.
And after her divorce, she was clearly looking for a new role, a role on the world stage. Would you say she threw herself into this task with renewed vigour after that break you described she took from the Red Cross?
I think what happened after she resigned from all the charities was that she took some time out to think about it. I was aware of her giving quite a lot of time and thought to what was the best way in which to use the skills, the experience, the fact that the press and media were interested in her. What was the best way to use that? And she took quite a lot of time thinking this through over the last year or two. And when she reduced to 6 or 7 different causes, she gave a lot more energy and time and effort to those, and she dealt with them in much more depth. I remember a conversation with her in Angola as we were going to one of the first appointments. We were in the Land Cruiser together, and she just saw the miles and miles of devastation. We drove past an enormous market, and it was just absolute poverty. And I think she was quite shocked, on the one hand, but very interested to be there, because she felt very comfortable talking to ordinary people and felt that she had something to contribute. And that's, I think, largely what made that trip the success that it was.
And how close would you say you are to success in getting the worldwide ban on landmines that the Princess so dearly wanted?
Oh, I think tomorrow we have the meeting in Oslo, which will be putting together, we hope, a draft declaration to go to Ottawa at the end of the year. And the Princess was very heavily interested in that declaration and in the Ottawa process. She and I had many conversations about that. The fact that the British government have now become central to it, the fact that the Americans are now on board, I think means that that particular ban is gathering momentum, and she's played an enormous part in that process.
And of course a fitting tribute to the Princess's life and work if that comes about.
Well, it is very much so. We have two big events that were due to come up in October, which she was meant to attend. And I hope that they'll be able to go ahead almost as a tribute to her involvement.
Mike Whitlam, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we're joined now from Paris, where, of course, the horrendous accident took place, by our Europe correspondent, Bill Neely. Bill, what's the latest there?
Well, you join me outside the Salpêtre Hospital, where the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, has now been lying for 9.5 hours. However, the latest information I have comes not from here, but from police sources. It now seems clear that the police are interrogating, questioning at least 7 photojournalists, people who were involved in the chase of the Princess of Wales's car last night. It would appear that all, or at least most of them, are French, that they took a plane from the Mediterranean yesterday and arrived here in Paris yesterday afternoon, and their explicit target, of course, was to try and get a photograph of the Princess of Wales and Dodi Al-Fayed together. To that end, the police are particularly interested in one of the photojournalists, who they believe from eyewitness accounts may have tried to get his motorcycle in front of the car in which the Princess of Wales was travelling, in order somehow to swivel round and get a photograph of them through the windscreen, sitting as they were on the back seat. Obviously, as we've heard, a photograph like that of the two of them together is worth for a photographer a great deal of money, and this photographer in particular, if the police and the eyewitness are to be believed, seems to have gone to extraordinary lengths to get it. The police are investigating a possible case of manslaughter, and they are focusing on this one photographer in particular to see if he somehow tried to get in front of the car, and perhaps the car tried to avoid him and in doing so crashed. The scene here, much as it has been all morning, except the crowds are growing. What started off as a few dozen people and a few posies and a few bouquets has grown into now perhaps a couple of hundred on both sides of the road. Riot police, French police have come to maintain the security here, and the bouquets of flowers are arriving by the dozen now, being placed in front of the hospital door underneath the French flag, which is flying on this beautiful late summer's day that the Princess of Wales never lived to see.
Bill, maybe slightly a naive question, but why were the French so obsessed with a British princess?
Well, as I said, the chief reason for any photojournalist, and one doesn't defend them in this, is the enormous amounts of money that will be paid for a photograph of Diana with any new friend, or, as it seems Dodi Al-Fayed was, a new love. Each one of those people, it seems, were freelancers or working for newspapers. Their capture of such a photograph would have been worth tens, hundreds of thousands, and they went to extraordinary lengths to get them. We know from the past that when any member of the royal family came to France in particular, a lot of photographers, a lot of freelance photographers went to great lengths to get photographs. The police think possibly in this case that those lengths were far, far too great.
And Bill, what news of the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles's movements? We know he's coming over to Paris today to accompany his former wife's body back to Britain.
The details are still sketchy, but we understand that the Prince of Wales will make a public arrival here at the hospital, which suggests he will come from the military airport outside Paris by car and not by helicopter, perhaps, as we once thought. He will arrive at the hospital. He will stay an amount of time, and then the Prince of Wales and the body of the Princess of Wales will be taken from here in the early evening through the streets of Paris, as Diana had come last night on her last journey through those streets, out through the little suburbs to the military airport, where her body will be taken by plane back to Britain.
Bill Neely in Paris, thank you very much. Well, Mark Webster has been keeping a close eye on all the various bits of information that have been flooding into the ITN newsroom. Let's join him now. Mark.
Yes, indeed. We do have confirmation that, of course, the Prince of Wales will be flying out as soon as he possibly can to Paris. As I was saying earlier, we now have confirmation he'll be going in a Royal Squadron aircraft and be flying back into RAF Northolt at 7 p.m. We also have a statement from Harrods, where obviously they've been talking about the loss of Dodi Fayed, where Mr. Fayed was saying that, of course, his son's loss is an enormous tragedy for him. And also accusations against the press. We have a statement here that Mr. Fayed's quite sure this tragedy would never have happened if it were not for photographers. It says it's terrible they were simply having a quiet dinner, one hounded in this way when they left the restaurant. Talking about his son, saying Dodi was a kind, gentle and courteous person. He'd known the princess for 10 years and they were very great friends. Obviously, a spokesman for Harrods is saying Mr. Al Fayed is going to take a long time to recover from this. He's a strong man with great strength, great resilience and great character. He's bringing his son back to Britain to be buried here. He's very patriotic, he says, about this country. Also, we've heard that there is a state of mourning in Wales. Got the very latest here. That there's an atmosphere of devastation, it says, throughout Wales. Special prayers were said for Diana, for the royal family, by shocked Sunday morning congregations. They were mourning their Princess of Wales. The bells at Cardiff's Llandaff Cathedral were tolling mournfully. It says a sad contrast to the joyful Thanksgiving service there on St David's Day in 1991, when, of course, the Princess proudly introduced Prince William to Wales in his first official public engagement in the Principality. But as you say, tributes have been pouring in from all around the world, from heads of state, and perhaps most of all from ordinary people who knew and loved Diana, or indeed who just knew her image and the work that she was doing.
OK, Mark, thank you very much. Well, let's talk again with our royal correspondent, Nicholas Owen. Nicholas, we heard there the Al Fayed family criticising the press, Princess Diana's brother heaping scorn on newspaper editors' head. Clearly, the finger of blame being pointed in that direction.
Yes, very, very much so. Just let's remind ourselves, for people who may not have seen everything that we've been reporting this morning, Earl Spencer, that's to say, you know, he succeeded his father to that title, the brother of the Princess of Wales. He said, he went on about it's heartbreaking and so forth, and then he said, quite suddenly, I think, we were both rather found it quite breathtaking, the vehemence with which he said, I always believed the press would kill her in the end. And then he said this business about, which you raised with that, with Mike Lloyd, the freelance cameraman, you know, every editor in this country he was talking about who's paid for pictures obtained in this sort of way, every editor has blood on his hands. And he then pleaded, of course, for privacy for his family to mourn. But that is going to be the great issue here, isn't it?
Earl Spencer has had his own dealings with the press.
Yeah, indeed he has.
Not too happy ones.
Yeah, not too happy at all. I think he sort of blames the press really for the breakup of his marriage. I mean, the Princess of Wales never did that. I don't think she thought, you know, the problems in her own marriage, which led to divorce after 15 years, were of a more fundamental nature, unfortunately. But in Earl Spencer's case, yes, he suffered very grievously from the attentions of the press, and now here he's saying everything here. And you know, the other thing, we've been hearing a lot about the wonderful charity work that the princess did. I've just been thinking about some of the other things we don't hear so much about. Leprosy sufferers, for example, benefited. Young cancer sufferers particularly. She was always had a particular place in her heart for them. And Mike Whitlam of the Red Cross, he talked about the visit to Angola, didn't he, on the landmines thing. But don't forget that she was more recently, the princess, in Bosnia. She went to Bosnia. I mean, that was some people thought a rather harebrained mission. Security wasn't all that easy to maintain. A lot of diplomatic niceties and people saying, oh, well, she might meet the wrong people, you know, people sort of associated with war criminals. But she was utterly determined to go ahead, and she swept away, and she did it. And, of course, the world's press followed her, and everybody benefited very mightily from it.
It was often said in situations like that, wasn't it, that she didn't really understand what she was getting into. But we heard from Mike Whitlam there, who organised the Angola trip for the Red Cross, that he said she mastered the brief remarkably well.
Yeah, she was jolly good at doing that. I mean, it's a sort of skill that politicians seem to be able to master, you know, and some journalists, let's hope, do it as well. But not so easy perhaps for a lady who I think left school with perhaps one O-level or a couple of O-levels, or maybe not even that. You know, some people in the old days used to be rather scornful of her, as they would see it, lack of education and so forth, lack of formal education. But no, she was jolly sharp on the uptake. I mean, the House of Windsor, being married into the House of Windsor, taught her a lot of things, and that was one of the many things that she did come come to do very, very well, and so she could speak with great authority. I think she didn't get caught out. She wasn't an embarrassment ever. She didn't turn to somebody and say, "I believe you've come from Bristol," and they said, "Oh no, I've come from Edinburgh," sort of thing. There are members of the royal family a bit prone to doing that, but never the princess. She was always on top of everything. She tackled, and I think Mike Whitlam put the point very well that once the princess was involved, my goodness, everything just sort of swept all before her. And she might have achieved this incredible thing of changing world opinion on this subject of landmines. I mean, that would be an incredible memorial to her, wouldn't it?
Nick, thanks very much. Well, Elizabeth Walker, the executive fashion editor of Marie Claire magazine, is with me in the studio now. Elizabeth Walker, apart from the charity work, one other thing that the princess will, of course, be remembered for is the dazzling array of dresses she wore over the years.
Yes, I was thinking this morning that it was a mite frivolous to be talking about frocks at an appalling time like this, but as her great sale of frocks was very recently in the papers, we can't help thinking that she was the most wonderful ambassador for British style, and I don't think we were particularly known for being stylish, but she, I think, single-handedly managed to change that.
And there was, of course, very recently, that amazing auction of her dresses.
That was the one I was referring to.
Yes, of course, it charted fashion over the ages almost, didn't it?
It was, I mean, when you think of the early pictures, you see the early pictures of her when she'd just sort of left being a nursery school teacher and got engaged. She went from being a signet to being a most gorgeous swan. And whether she was wearing a flak jacket in Angola or a ball gown to a charity function, she just had a huge sense of personal style.
She also did know, of course, how to use clothes, didn't she? There was that famous black dress, little black dress she wore on the night of the Jonathan Dimbleby interview with her then husband, Prince Charles. There it is, meeting Lord Palumbo there, I think.
In fact, I saw a copy of it the other day at a fashion fair, and I think a lot of copies of those have been sold.
And, of course, all the photographs on the front pages the next day were of the princess.
Well, exactly. Well, I mean, she's much more photogenic than, obviously, Prince Charles.
Would it be true to say she loved clothes, she loved what they could do for her?
I think she liked them, but in the context that lots of girls do like clothes. We've got a wider variety of things that we can wear than most men, so we're a bit spoilt from that. And not to the point of addiction about clothes, I wouldn't have thought so, no.
It was also said that pictures like that on the front page of magazines like yours would add tens of thousands to their sales.
And that's true. We don't, in fact, use personalities on our covers, but I do know from friends who work in other areas of our business that it just makes an immense impact. In fact, Spanish Vogue have just used their first picture of the Princess of Wales on their latest cover, and the sales have, I think, nearly doubled.
Would it be true to say then the most photographed woman in the world?
I would think so, yes.
Elizabeth Walker, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, with me in the studio all morning is, of course, Nicholas Owen. Nick, you went to that sale, did you, in New York, the auction of her dresses. There were some amazing scenes and amazing bids. Got a huge amount of money for her favourite charity.
Certainly did, Dermot, yes, absolutely. I mean, it was quite an extraordinary event, like so many other things. But, you know, I have to say, I mean, I absolutely agree with this point. I think fashion was part of the princess's armoury, but I don't think she saw it in a silly way. You know, it was to be well turned out was in many ways to the tribute to the people she was meeting and an underscoring the importance of the event. But I actually have other memories, you know, Angola, she wasn't dressed like a fashion plate there at all, was she? She was quite capable of turning up in a pair of, well, they were never quite scruffy jeans, I have to confess. They were always rather expensive jeans, but, you know, well, I think we're going to Balmoral.
Yes, we're going to Balmoral, where apparently the Queen and Prince Philip are leaving the service at the church. They're just outside the main gate of Balmoral. The young princes, William and Harry, have been at the church as well. We're not sure in which car they are travelling. There they are, just coming back down the drive from Crathy Parish Church. Of course, the Prince of Wales is not thought to be with his family there.
I think, Dermot, I think he was said to be there. In one of the reports, I think he was. We may be able to see if we look carefully. That's the Queen Mother. Couldn't quite see who was in that car.
The royal family gathered in their grief.
I'm pretty sure they were all
Prince
there.
Philip up front there, didn't it?
Certainly. Let's just have a look. I think that's the Prince of Wales and his two sons, unless I'm very much mistaken. In that second, that's a police car at the very end. That third car along, pretty sure that contained the Prince of Wales and the Princes William and Harry.
also for the Prince of Wales, presumably now immediately on board a flight to Paris.
Yeah, yes, he's going over there, as has been said. He's going to accompanied by Diana's two sisters. They are going over to Paris, and they will bring the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, back to this country this very afternoon.
Well, Nick, let's go straight back now to Balmoral, and our reporter on the spot there is David Rose. David, I don't know if you heard myself and Nick speculating there if the Prince of Wales actually was in those cars. Did you get a better view of it than we did?
Yes, so the third car contained the Prince of Wales and his two sons.
And do we know now what his movements are? We know he's going to Paris. Is it believed that he will be leaving almost immediately?
You're saying that. We have no firm information here, and I talked to one of the senior police officers here. They didn't seem to know, but I imagine arrangements for travel have been made while the royal family has been in church.
Is there a large crowd gathered there, and what is the mood amongst them?
Very quiet, very sombre. I've talked to a few people, astonishingly, at least to my mind. I mean, buses have been rolling up with English tourists, American tourists. They all seem to know about the tragedy, but they wanted to come along anyway. But some people have come specifically, some Scots, some English people, who heard the news and say they wanted to come along and pay their respects to the Queen in person, which I suppose they felt they did as she drove past. And people close to tears watching the royal cars going up to the little church and back down again.
David Rose in Balmoral, thank you very much. Well, Steve Scott was with the Princess in Angola, and he joins us now in the studio. Steve, myself and Nick and Mike Whitlam from the Red Cross were talking about that trip, about how well prepared the Princess was for it, how easily she mastered the brief and how well she understood the issues.
Absolutely. It was a remarkable trip for many reasons. First of all, because it sort of marked a new wave of her involvement in charity work, and she was so well briefed. You know, she'd obviously done a lot of work, and she made it a very intimate trip with the press pack who were there, and that really it was an indication of the passion she felt for the...
I think we've got some of the pictures you and your team shot there, Steve.
Yeah, now of course most of these victims, well in fact all of these victims, didn't know who the Princess was. But they were just pleased that someone was interested. But it was amazing. She's got this magic touch, as I'm sure you've been talking about today. Especially with the
favourite pose there with the child.
Especially with these amputees, she's very tactile. And where other people may get embarrassed about injuries like this, she didn't. She sat right there. She talked to them about their injuries, and that was the magic she had. And she sort of lifted everybody's day.
Did you talk to any of the people after she'd had a chat with them, hugged them, touched them? I mean,
yeah.
What effect did she have?
She was a very uplifting presence there. They are a people who are very impoverished, and they think they're forgotten by the entire world. They don't even know that the rest of the world knows they exist. But this visit from a princess, as they were told she was a princess, although they didn't know who, it was just very uplifting for her. But of course, it wasn't without its controversy, this trip, because while she was there, while she was walking through this minefield, back in the UK, one MP called her a loose cannon, and she confronted that head-on as well. She didn't understand why she was getting criticism. They say she was treading on politics, but she said, look, I'm a humanitarian, I'm not a politician, I'm a humanitarian, I'm only trying to do my best to help. And that's the way she told us all she wanted to be seen in the future.
But she let it be known very subtly that she was upset by that criticism, didn't she?
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, she was unprepared for one reason, but also she was because she kept saying, she said, I don't understand why people are criticising me. All I'm trying to do is do some good in another part of the world because I know I'm followed by the press everywhere I go. Let's turn that into something good. That's what she was trying to do in Angola, and that's why she was upset with this criticism she got from MPs, because, of course, at the time, it seemed like she was criticising the Tory government policy.
Had you come across the Princess before in your professional career?
No, not in such an intimate way. I mean, I've been on stories where she's been the focus of it, of course.
Well, you've seen politicians, world leaders, whatever, dealing with the great issues of our time. How did the Princess impress you?
Well, what impressed me about her was her honesty over this trip. She was well briefed, which may be something that people might not expect of her. They might have thought, OK, she's part of this campaign, but she might just turn up there to be the face, to have the pictures taken. But she was very well briefed, and she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew which photographs would make the papers, and she wanted this right on the front pages, and she got it. She knew by walking through a field of landmines, that would be on the front page of the paper. She knew she chose the girls, the amputees, who she wanted to be photographed with, because she wanted to get as much publicity as possible. So she was very, very aware and very clever in that respect.
This was her using the press for her own ends.
Exactly.
She also, we were commenting on it a bit earlier there, she also knew how to dress. She was no clothes horse on that visit.
Not at all. No, absolutely, which is the immediate thing that impressed you when she got off the plane. There she was in jeans, designer jeans albeit, but she was
Still
wearing
looking
jeans.
fabulous.
Of course, and wearing just a T-shirt or a singlet or whatever. And that's the way she went about it, because part of the reason for that trip was obviously to publicise the landmines issue, but also she wanted to tell the world that, hey, this is me, this is the new Diana, the new hands-on image, this is how I want to be seen in the future, and that's exactly how it went.
Steve Scott, thank you very much indeed. Now, Mark Webster in the ITN newsroom has the latest information for us.
Well, indeed, among the flood of tributes now pouring in from around the world, the very latest that I've got, it's just come up here on the news agency, is from the Spanish royal family, and King Juan Carlos, Queen Sofia and their children said they're deeply affected by the news and expressed their feelings of sorrow and pain. I think what's also emerging very strongly is from a number of people who've been talking that they'll be looking very, very carefully indeed at exactly what happened in this accident to see what the role of the paparazzi might have been. I think it's very telling that in the statement which was issued by Michael Cole, who you hear from in a moment, Director of Public Affairs at Harrods, he said quite categorically, Mr. El Fayed is quite sure this tragedy would never have happened if it were not for the photographers. We've already heard from Princess Diana of Wales' brother, the Earl, that he is also equally confident that if it had not been for the role of the paparazzi, her death could have been avoided. Now, I think what we will be looking at in the coming hours is the police in Paris looking very, very carefully at exactly what did happen in the tunnel to cause that accident, to see if there are any criminal charges to be brought against any of those who were responsible.
Well, Mark, thank you very much indeed. And as Mark's just been telling us, the Al Fayed family have been reacting to the death of Dodi Fayed and the Princess through their spokesman, Michael Cole. Let's hear what he had to say.
Mr. Al Fayed believes that this appalling tragedy would never have happened but for the attentions of these people who I suppose we shall have to call photographers. It was quite appalling what happened, and we're just coming to terms with that.
You blame the photographers for the accident?
I think we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to leave that for the police to investigate, which I understand they are. The thing is, Dodi was a man of charm and great courtesy. He was a very gentle man, and he brought a lot of happiness into the lives of people he met. He had a great respect and admiration for the princess. He cherished her friendship. Indeed, the whole Fayed family cherished that friendship. Mr. Al Fayed was an old friend of the princess's late father, Earl Spencer. Earl Spencer was a great supporter of the Fayed family through thick and thin, and Mohammed said, I think quite rightly, that he's my brother.
Michael Cole there, the spokesman for the Al Fayed family. Well, Nicholas Owen is with me in the studio. Nicholas, what do you make of that real anger there about the press?
Yes, indeed. I mean, echoing the anger that we heard from the present Earl Spencer, talking about, you know, the press actually killing the Princess of Wales. That's what Earl Spencer said. But Michael Cole said there, it would never have happened but for the attentions of photographers. Then he did stress it was for the police to investigate. If we could just draw, you know, other threads that we've been hearing. Bill Neely, our correspondent in Paris, he said that the police were investigating very seriously this idea that one of the motorcyclists involved, or perhaps a pillion passenger, I would imagine, on the back of a motorbike, was actually trying to cut in front of the princess, which would help to explain why that car was going so very quickly, perhaps 100 miles an hour, into that tunnel, desperate to get away.
I mean, it looks like a straight road there.
Very, very possibly, absolutely. There was a desperate attempt to get away, and as we now know, with those most catastrophic of results. I mean, the scene that presented itself, the destruction of the car that we have seen, some while since we've seen those pictures, but they are, as you and I remember when we first saw them in the early hours of this morning, a dreadful wreck, and we did say, very difficult to imagine anyone getting out alive, and now we know that the princess and Dodi did not, nor did the driver. But on that business of the photographers, this is where there's going to be so much focus of rage, focus of anger. And the other thing that Michael Cole said, we must bear this in mind. Some people said, why is the princess getting involved with Dodi Fayed, of all people? What a controversial family and all the ins and outs of it. But it was true that the late Earl Spencer, the present Earl Spencer's father, was a great friend of Mohammed Al Fayed, Dodi's father, and did support him in all the ups and downs of his business life. And let's remember, you know, what we have really here is the Al Fayed family, and the princess, both sort of anti-establishment in their own sort of way. Fiercely patriotic. I mean, Mohammed Al Fayed always talks about his patriotism, but also very, very anti-establishment, and we all know that the Princess of Wales saw herself as an outsider and talked about the way that she had been conspired against by the palace. She said that there were the enemies within, and all the phrases that she used. And it sounded very much, occasionally, the sort of phrases that the Fayed family used as well. So, you know, this terrible uniting of these two families and now brought into this terrible tragedy at the end.
Nick, thanks. OK, a reminder that we've broken into the regular ITV schedules for this special programme on Diana, Princess of Wales, who was killed in a car crash in Paris early this morning. She and her friend, Dodi Fayed, were being pursued by photographers on motorbikes when their car crashed into a tunnel alongside the River Seine shortly after midnight. Surgeons at a Paris hospital tried to stem internal bleeding in her chest but couldn't restart her heart. They declared her dead at 3 a.m. British time. Dodi Fayed died at the scene. Well, Lady Diana Spencer was just 19 when the Prince of Wales announced their engagement in 1981, catapulting her onto the public stage, which she would never be able to leave. While her love affair with Charles appeared almost doomed from the start, her love affair with the British people blossomed, and it wasn't long before the shy young woman found herself the most famous and most photographed face on the planet. Tim Wilcox has been looking back at her remarkable life.
She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Definitely happy and accompanied by her father, the 8th Earl Spencer, Diana bewitched not only the nation but the world at her marriage to Prince Charles on July the 29th, 1981. It was the start of a golden age for the British royal family. The 20-year-old Lady Diana Spencer, the first English girl in 500 years to marry a Prince of Wales. The eyes of the world were on her and she knew it. She was born Diana Frances Spencer on July the 1st, 1961, daughter of an aristocrat and friend of the royal family. Before she was linked with Prince Charles, she was just an anonymous face in London's Bed-Sitterland, a shy English rose from an illustrious family, but a family traumatised by the divorce of her parents. The publication of this picture, which embarrassed her, was her first real brush with photographers, the start of a love-hate relationship with the camera that endured all her life. In February 1981, the waiting was over and Buckingham Palace announced the couple's engagement. She was asked how she would cope with the enormous transition to royal life and the prospect of one day becoming queen.
It is, but I've had a small run out to it all in the last 6 months. And next to Prince Charles, I know I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
Gibraltar was the starting point for the honeymoon, a brief public appearance followed by a 2-week cruise on board Britannia along the Mediterranean. Relaxed, refreshed and ready for the future, they returned to Balmoral, the world's media eagerly awaiting them.
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
Diana's youthful naturalness made her a hit with all ages wherever she went. The marriage, at least publicly, seemed a perfect match, and within a year Prince William was born in June 1982. But the pressures of such a high-profile royal life were beginning to show. Diana was said to be suffering from postnatal depression here on this royal tour to Australia. There were rumours, too, that she was suffering from the slimmer's disease, anorexia nervosa, rumours that were dismissed by the palace. The royal roadshow continued, however, with Diana, now confident and fashion-conscious, taking the world by storm. In 1983, and Diana was becoming the world's #1 cover girl. And a year later, the princess with the fashion model looks gave birth to a second son, Prince Harry. With her children growing up, Diana immersed herself in charity work, taking on AIDS as one of her big causes, the princess helping to destigmatise the illness. But the marriage was beginning to fall apart, with the couple only seen together at times of national crisis. In private, they were leading separate lives. Then, in 1992, came the bombshell that was to destroy the myth of the happy royal marriage forever, with the publication of Diana, Her True Story by Andrew Morton. The couple continued to tour together, but it was obvious that the marriage was over. Diana vowed to continue with her charity work, but there soon followed a series of scandalous tape recordings featuring her and a male companion, then Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. The final straw came when a paper published pictures of her working out in a gym. She decided enough was enough.
I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become.
The last few years of the marriage were marred by unhappy and very public declarations of marital unhappiness. First, Prince... Her divorce from Charles was announced a year later. Diana was to embark on life as a single woman, still a princess, but now able to pursue her dream of becoming a roving humanitarian, free from the constraints of Buckingham Palace. Tim Wilcox, ITN.
Well, we're coming close to the end of this transmission. Before we go, let's join Mark Webster in the ITN newsroom for a roundup of some of the latest developments.
Well, I can confirm that the Prince of Wales will leave very soon for France. He'll be returning with the body of his late wife and will arrive at RAF Northolt, which is near London, at around 7 p.m. As for the arrangements for Dodi Fayed, his father is certainly going to go out to Paris as soon as possible. He too will be making his own arrangements, and one assumes that the driver of the car, who also died, we mustn't forget, will remain in France. I can say among the deluge of tributes which has come in, the latest one is from Lady Annabel Goldsmith, who's the mother of Jemima Khan, who, as you know, is a close friend of Diana, Princess of Wales. She said, "I'm shocked and saddened by the death of the Princess of Wales. As a family, we'll miss her enormously, and she'll be a great loss to the nation. At this moment in time, my thoughts are with Prince William and Prince Harry, to whom she was the most devoted of mothers." Those tributes that have been coming in from heads of government, heads of state, and from people who just knew or knew of her have all spoken of the two things. One is her enormous commitment to charities, the other is of her extraordinary personal qualities, which have been remembered with warmth today. But as I say, the very latest is that Prince Charles will be going out to bring back the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, back to the UK for burial.
Mark, thanks for that. Let's go now to our reporter Helen Wright at Kensington Palace. Helen, we've witnessed some moving scenes there throughout the course of the morning. What's happening there now?
Well, those moving scenes very much continuing. The pavement outside the palace absolutely covered with flowers right to the end of the pavement. In fact, the flowers are now sort of snaking around the outside of the building. There's still scores of people queuing to leave bouquets here, many of them very upset, many crying, many really still can't quite believe what's happened, and many people saying to me here today that their thoughts are with the princess's family, with Prince Charles and with particularly her sons. Many people have said to me that they hope that the Princes William and Harry will not be subjected to the sort of media attention that their mother was.
Helen, has there been any information coming out from Kensington Palace?
There's been no formal statement from Kensington Palace here. There have been comings and goings, cars passing in and out, cars bringing more flowers into the palace, but no official word, no sort of members of staff from the palace speaking to us at all today.
Helen Wright at Kensington Palace. Thank you very much indeed. Well, it's not just at Kensington Palace where there have been these expressions of sadness. Thousands of worshippers have been praying for Princess Diana and the royal family in churches up and down the country. And our reporter, Eric McInnes, has been at one service at a church in Worcestershire.
At this church in Warwickshire, as in so many across the land, people have come together to share their pain. For centuries, these buildings have been the magnet in times of triumph and tragedy. Today, that was no less so. Hundreds came to a rearranged service to express their grief.
We find ourselves saying, why? Why, God? Why should something like this happen, especially to someone who has already suffered a great deal of distress in life? And there are no easy answers to that question, and we shouldn't attempt to give any. Obviously, our hearts must go out to William and Harry, these two lads who've lost their mum so suddenly and so tragically, and also to Al Fayed too, and the family of the driver who lost his life.
In the coming days, people will have time to reflect on Princess Diana's life. She was deeply loved. Today, in these first hours, in villages and towns, shock and grief dominate the nation's thoughts. Eric McInnes, ITN, Warwickshire.
Prayers there being offered up for Princess Diana. Well, our political correspondent Tom Bradby is at Downing Street now. Tom, any idea what the Prime Minister is up to at the moment? We saw him attending church at his constituency in Sedgefield. Where is he now?
He's likely to be travelling to Chequers, where he's going to be this afternoon. And incidentally, Downing Street are clarifying that they're not actually going to be directly involved in discussions about the period of official mourning and funeral arrangements. They're saying simply that that's a matter for Buckingham Palace. That's where the announcements will come, and that they're offering their support and advice should it be needed or if it is wanted. They're also saying they're sort of briefing on this whole question of privacy. They're pointing out that the Prime Minister's instincts have always been a question of self-regulation. He's never favoured a change in the law, but nevertheless they do acknowledge that there is a great deal of public anger building, and they say they're looking at this very carefully. They say they've been particularly interested to hear the comments of Earl Spencer this morning.
Tom, thank you very much. Well, let's go to Buckingham Palace now. Our correspondent there is Tim Hewitt. He's been there throughout the morning. Tim, in many ways, Buckingham Palace is the focus of the nation's grief.
Yes, indeed, Dermot. It's been the focal point of that grief since very early this morning. We've been here since, 4:30, 5 o'clock, when the very, very first people started to gather on hearing the news. I think really all the sentiments that you've been talking about in the studio over the last few minutes have been encapsulated down here. A feeling of tremendous sadness, obviously, but shock, disbelief, and yes, some anger. That anger has in part been directed against those of us from the press who have been here. A lot of people have felt that we've been intrusive in our coverage of the royal family, and that has been reflected by some of the people here. But mainly it's been a morning of quite extraordinary grief. Hundreds of bouquets of flowers have been laid at the main gates of Buckingham Palace. There's been a crowd at one point of several thousand people. As you can probably see now, that crowd is beginning to disperse, a lot of them actually standing and listening to the various broadcasters who are transmitting from here, as well as gathering around Buckingham Palace. The guard was changed here about an hour and a half ago. The band of the 1st Battalion of the Scots Guards played some very sad and moving laments that seemed to capture the entire mood. So it really has been a very, very sad morning, a very sharp contrast to a day that I remember 15 or 16 years ago, when this area of London was completely jammed with people for the royal wedding. And that was a quite extraordinarily joyous occasion. Today, I'm afraid to say, it's been absolutely the reverse.
Tim Hewitt at Buckingham Palace. Thank you very much indeed. Well, in a few moments, we'll have a full roundup of all the day's news with Carol Barnes. But before that, there's a chance to see some of the most memorable images of the life of Princess Diana, the Princess of Wales. Just let me recap on that story. The Princess was, of course, killed in a car accident in Paris in the early hours of this morning. Well, these are the pictures which brought her to the attention of millions around the world and helped win her a special place in all of their hearts.
Yeah, I'm only trying to highlight a problem that's going on all around the world. That's all. Life is mostly froth and bubble. Two things stand like stone: kindness in another's trouble, courage in your own.